Those were the days.
Hey everyone, I'm Justin Lee Hareld, and I am here with an extended version of my segment called Those Were the Days. This is where I take a recap of all of those were the days I did for the month and do a little bit more of a deep dive into these plots. I give you a little bit more of some behind the scenes tidbits just to kind of round out what was going on both in Salem and outside of Salem at the time. So let's dive right in. The first one we are starting with is the Those Were the Days from October 6th. And this one I'm taking you back to September 30th, 2011. And this was when John Black, who newly returned to Salem with Marlena, was arrested for embezzlement and security frauds. Now, just to give you a little background for this one, not only were John and Marlena coming back to town, but also Drake and Deidre were coming back to town because, unfortunately, 2 years prior, they were fired from the show and sort of which caused a little bit of a fan outcry, the idea that Days of Our Lives could go on with John and Marlena. But I think at the time we had some new producers come in, and I think they wanted to really build up the next generation, the cast had by Allison Sweeney. So I think they were really focused on that. So they decided to put John and Marlena, Deidre and Drake sort of on hold for a while. Nobody knew how long that would take. I think the general idea was that they would bring them back at some point. But again, we didn't know if that would be a few months, if that would be a year, and then they would return. But it ended up actually being 2 years, with sort of Allison Sweeney kind of heading the show from then on. But yes, we got word that they were actually coming back. We figured, how will they come back to Salem? But they came back sort of with a bang with this storyline. And getting back to the plot, we had John and Marlena sort of entering Salem back again. They're coming back during the grand opening of the Horton Town Square. So John and Marlena just arrived. This is them coming actually back from Switzerland. If you remember at this time, when they exited 2 years prior, John was going to Switzerland to get medical treatment because he was paralyzed. And this was the conclusion of that whole Ryan DeMira, Ryan Brady storyline where John was killed, then he came back from the dead, he had amnesia, and he divorced Marlena. He was fully embracing himself as Ryan DeMira and working with the DeMiras, living in the mansion. Him and Marlena break up. She divorces him. He gets amnesia, has an accident, is paralyzed, gets his memory back. Him and Marlena reunite, and they decide to go off and get him treatment for his paralysis, and they exit Salem for 2 years, and this is them finally making their return. Again, it's coinciding with the grand opening of Horton Town Square, where we also saw the arrival of Austin and Carrie were back in town. Now, John is immediately handcuffed, as you can see here, by Rafe and Roman, and he is charged with embezzlement and security frauds for using basic black and basically squandering half the town's retirement accounts. So this is them at the behest of the FBI putting him in handcuffs and charting him off. Then we have Carrie actually at this point is acting as John's lawyer, and she teams up with Rafe, who was recently fired from the Salem PD, and they set out on a mission to prove that John is innocent. He could not have done any of this. This is crazy. What are they talking about? So they eventually, fast forward a little bit, they eventually prove that the evidence against John was doctored, and they fully exonerate him 100%. But in the meantime, John's conviction sort of puts people on edge. We have half the town divided, feeling that they scammed him out of their money. And then we have the other half believing that John would never do such a thing and that he must be completely innocent. And on one half, again, we have Carrie and Rafe who are working together to exonerate him, which they do. And then the other side, we have Sammy and Austin, who do not believe John, who think he is 100% guilty of everything he is accused of. So that puts a wedge in these relationships with Austin, Carrie, and Sammy and Rafe, which then leads to a invitation for Carrie and Rafe to get together. This sort of couple never really took off. They sort of flirted with each other. They got close with each other when they were working together to free John, of course. They flirted. You have the animosity with Carrie and Sammy. You sort of have Austin and Rafe, who are sort of archetypes who are very similar. So you have them budding as a foursome together. And it, again, that couple never really took off. I think they kind of wanted to do something with Carrie and Rafe, but it never just picked up steam as sort of the other relationships did. So it kind of fizzled out. And the conclusion was that Carrie sort of found herself pregnant with Noah actually, and her and Austin decided to work on their marriage, to give it another chance, and to head back to Switzerland to sort of be by themselves and away from the craziness of Salem. So that's sort of how that storyline wrapped up. Moving on to our next one. This one was a definite one. I know you will remember. This one is from Those Were the Days I did on October 13th. And I'm taking you back to October 9th, 2015, where Ben Weston, as the necktie killer, murders beloved Will Horton, at the time played by Guy Wilson. Here, as you can see. Now, this storyline, but let me give you a little backstory here. Will, who was a reporter at the time for the Salem Spectator, was investigating the story of the necktie killer. He sort of stumbled on the fact that it was Ben Weston. Ben sort of clued in that Will knew, and Will unfortunately became one of Ben's 4 victims, and actually the only legacy character to be killed off in this storyline. Now, the media attention from this one was incredibly negative. People really took it to heart that beloved character Will Horton was killed off and done in such a gruesome manner. People were not for it. Will was such a beloved character. And there was also another element to this that sort of, I think, rubbed people the wrong way. There seemed to be this idea that they were sort of getting rid of a lot of the gay characters on the show, and that the show was sort of pushing a little bit more of a conservative agenda. There seemed to be this idea that a lot of the conservative viewers sort of were writing in and complaining that there was too much gay content on the show. And if you remember, at the time, we had Will fully cemented as a gay man character. We had Sonny cemented. They had their relationship ups and downs at this point. And we also had Christopher Sean come in as Paul during this time. So we had 3 full gay male characters on the show interacting with each other, all part of core families. And so it seemed like people, maybe some of those conservatives, thought that the gay content was a little much. Or anyway, there were lots of complaints. There seemed to be some conspiracy theories, like I said, about were they pushing out the gay characters, because at the end of this, the fallout from this was that Will, of course, was gone as a murdered character. We had Paul, who exited a little bit before this actually happened. And then we had the character of Sonny sort of leave canvas in the wake of Will's death. So it seemed like the show was taking a sort of 180 abrupt turn when it came to focusing on the gay characters and even having them on canvas, which was unfortunate. The good thing I'll say that we got from this storyline was we got some really great performances, specifically from Alison Sweeney and Brian Datillo. Alison agreed to come back. She had already been off the show at this point for a couple of years. She agreed to come back reluctantly, and she seemed to make it very well known publicly that she did not like this storyline, and she did not agree with the idea of killing off Will, who was such a beloved character and a legacy character. But she thought it was important for her to come back as Sammy and sort of give the character of Will a final sort of goodbye in terms of his funeral. So she reluctantly agreed, and she came back for a few episodes and gave just an amazing performance. And then we had Brian Datillo at the other end, of course, Lucas as Will's father. And a lot of times we always complain about, is Brian getting enough good material? Why don't they use him more? What are they doing with him? Give him some stuff, he'll shine. And they absolutely did with this plot line. Over the next couple of years, they had Lucas's character sort of go in and out of a couple of relationships. They had him go in and out of his sobriety, relapsing a couple of times. And Brian Datillo 100% delivered. So I'd say the positive of that performance is it definitely galvanized that storyline. And it also gave us, again, some great performances by Alison Sweeney and Brian Datillo. And then what we had coming next was a Hail Mary in the form of some gay karma, because 2 years later, we had a new head writer on canvas, and that was, in fact, Ron Colavardi. And one of the first orders of business that he made known that he would do was that he was going to bring Will Horton back, and that he was going to resurrect Will, and that that was going to be one of the first things that he did. So I think fans sort of rejoiced that we were going to get Will back in some form or another. We didn't know what that was going to look like or how that was going to be, but we were eventually going to get him back. So all the wrongs were going to be righted. And then again, 2 years later, this is now 2017, we had the failed wedding of Chad and Abigail and Sonny and Paul. This is where Ben revealed that Will was in fact alive and that he had not killed him as previously thought. And again, later that year, 2017, we had Will Horton resurrected, this time with Chandler Massey reprising the role and coming back. In a sort of interesting storyline. If you remember, it was Susan, Dr. Rolfe, had taken Will's almost deceased body after being strangled and injected him with the infamous serum. Then Susan told an amnesiac Will that he was in fact her son EJ Demira because she wanted revenge against Sammy because she felt like Sammy was the cause of EJ's death, who at this point was dead on the show and not around. So for the last 2 years while Will was off canvas, he was in fact living in Memphis with Susan and her fiance Roger under the guise that he was his former stepfather, Elvis John Demira. So that was sort of the plot line that encapsulated sort of Will being off canvas for those 2 years. When he did come back, got his memory back. They sort of had this plot line where they decided to put Will and Ben together as best friends, which it was a little confusing for some people. Some people weren't exactly jiving with this plot line, but I think they stuck to it and they had Will sort of forgive Ben for it. And then they sort of came to a head where a couple years later, Ben and Will were actually cellmates in prison together. They were both there for crimes that they did not commit. Ben was there for the murder of his sister, Jordan Ridgway, and Will was there for the murder of his mother-in-law, Adrienne Kiriakis. So both of them bonded while they were cellmates in prison, especially with Ben sort of looking out for Will, and sort of that cemented their bond as sort of best friends coming back. So when they were released from prison, they continued that bond, all sort of encapsulating it. And we got sort of a little bit of a full circle moment here when Ben and Sierra actually got married and Will was acted as best man for their union. So yeah, again, we had a full circle moment here where one character was out of his mind with mental illness and murdered the other character. And within the span of 2.5 years, those characters now became best friends on the canvas. So yeah, that kind of wrapped up that plot line. Moving forward to our next one. This is Those Were the Days That I Did actually on 10/20. This is where I took you guys back to October 14, 2010, to the wedding day of Jonas and Chloe Lane, while Chloe was also pregnant with an unborn Parker. And just to give you a little backstory on these two, since it's interesting, Daniel actually started developing feelings for Chloe while he was treating her for cancer. Now, this is not a surprise because the character of Daniel often fell in love with his patients, starting back in the day with Chelsea Brady and then with her grandmother, Kate Roberts. So this is couple years sort of after that debacle, and he is treating Chloe for her cancer. They're sort of flirting with each other. They're kind of getting close now. At the time, Kate had just broken things off with Daniel, but also Chloe was very much with Lucas at this point. And so they're sort of fighting their attraction with each other, but they sort of gave in. Daniel and Chloe slowly begin to have an affair behind Lucas and Kate's back. Kate finds out about this, and in typical Kate fashion, she hatches a revenge plan, not only on behalf of Chloe Lane, who she's hated for years, and the fact that it is her beloved son Lucas, but also for the fact that she still, again, had lingering feelings for Daniel and would not allow a man to sort of get the best of her in typical Kate Roberts fashion. So Kate hatches this plan that she is going to poison Chloe and that she is going to frame Daniel for her murder. Fortunately, Chloe survives. But what comes from this is actually more interesting than the plot line of Kate trying to kill these two people. What comes from it is the fact that Chloe survives. They figure out that someone is sort of orchestrating this and behind it. And in comes in Stefano DiMera. He finds the evidence against Kate. He takes that evidence, he holds it, and he decides to use it to blackmail Kate into her hand of marriage. Kate, of course, not wanting to face decades in prison, she decides to take Stefano up on his devil's bargain. And what we get is actually, I will say, one of the best plot lines I think Days has done. I think one of the best pairings that Days have done. We actually got Kate and Stefano together as a married couple. Again, it was done reluctantly and was sort of under duress for Kate's part, but I think once she got there, her and Stefano actually had a really loving, sort of deranged, macabre marriage, I'll say. I think they were perfect for each other. I think they sort of ruled sort of the DiMera side of the family really well. This is probably the best time that the DiMeras had a resurgence. We had them as the patriarch and matriarch. We had, of course, Lexi and Abe on canvas. We had Nicole with EJ at the time. And then we also had some occasional visits from Benji at the time. So this is where we had Kate and Stefano, sort of matriarch and patriarch of the DiMera family. But getting back to Chloe and Daniel, what resulted from that is that Chloe and Daniel sort of eventually overcame Kate's plot. They made it down the aisle, which we saw in that first picture. And that photo is very telling because I want to point out what was going on at the time of that wedding. We had a lot of interference from exes, specifically from Chloe's ex, Philip Kyriakis, whom she actually had a one-night stand during her engagement to Daniel. And Daniel's ex, Daniel's ex, Carly Manning, who's the mother of his daughter, Melanie Jonas. She was also interfering in the sense that she is reeling from a recent breakup with Bo Brady. And she decides to sort of she becomes a little bit obsessed with Daniel at the same time that she is battling a pill addiction. So we have one ex in terms of Philip on one end, sort of going after Chloe. And then we have another ex, Carly Manning, sort of delving into her obsession with Daniel while also battling a pill addiction. So yeah, they headed down the aisle under those circumstances. But yes, they did get married. Parker was originally declared to be Daniel's son until we found out that Caroline Brady, under this idea that she wanted to help her granddaughter, Stephanie, she actually confessed to switching the paternity results, revealing that Parker is in fact Philip Kyriakis' son. This was sort of the nail in the coffin to the Chloe Daniel union. Daniel divorced Chloe. Chloe and Philip left town with Parker in tow. And then we jump forward a couple years later. Chloe and Parker come back to town with news that fortunately Parker is in fact Daniel's son. There was a mix-up with the paternity results, and that he in fact is not Philip Kyriakis' son. He's Daniel's. And so that's how we eventually got Parker to be Daniel's son moving forward. And then we have Daniel and Chloe eventually, after a couple years, come full circle with their sort of friendship at the time. It was rocky for a little while, but we have it sort of encapsulating with Chloe acting as a surrogate to Holly Jonas, who is Daniel and Nicole's biological daughter. So before Daniel's passing, they did make up, they did patch things up, and they actually developed a friendship where Chloe could come in and be the surrogate for his and Nicole's child. So yeah, started off rocky, but they managed to pull it a little bit together. So that was the infamous Jonas family in terms of Chloe, Daniel, and Parker. Next up, I'm taking you back to October 21st, 1993. This was those are the days for Belle Black's birth. She was actually born in the Horton cabin, if some of you watching back then, 1993, remember. And she was, in fact, delivered by John Black and Kristen DiMera, who at the time were meeting and getting close and just sort of starting to date. After that birth, she had a little bit of a health hiccup. Actually, Marlena passed out after she gave birth to Belle, and Belle stopped breathing, forcing John to kind of come in and save the day as her dad, that he didn't know yet, and administer CPR and sort of save the day. So this picture is them sort of in the hospital bed, and this is John admiring sort of Belle, not knowing that he's her actual father. Because if you remember back then, when Belle was born, wasn't born Belle Black. She was born Isabella Brady, and she was thought to be the biological daughter of Roman and Marlena. She was named in honor of Isabella Toscano Black, who was, of course, Brady's mom, and who died of pancreatic cancer a couple years earlier. And Marlena and Roman sort of wanted to honor Isabella and honor their relationship with Isabella and John. So they decided to name their daughter after him. So we know that Belle was the result of an affair that Marlena and John had, stemming from their lingering feelings when he thought he was Roman Brady and they were a couple. Then they had the infamous boardroom sex scene where Sammy witnessed John and Marlena and sent her down a path of juvenile delinquency. With that one, we had Sammy, who was distraught that her plans didn't work in terms of keeping Belle and the family, decide to kidnap Belle, if you remember, and sell her on the black market. And this was the first sort of defiant act that Sammy pulled as a teenage delinquent that sort of sent her down the path of no return. So Belle's eventual paternity was revealed when Sammy switched her set of paternity results, showing that she was Roman's daughter, She wrote about it in her diary, which Stefano then used to force Marlena to confess during Belle's christening. And that is how the secret came out, that Belle Brady was not, in fact, Belle Brady, that she was now going to be Belle Black because she was the biological daughter of John Black and not Roman Brady. What stemmed from this was a big fallout. Not only did it contribute to Roman ended up divorcing Marlena, he leaves town. John, unfortunately, did not reunite with Marlena at the time because he is in a new relationship with Kristen. Marlena becomes ostracized, actually, from the citizens of Salem. She loses patients who don't want to sort of deal with her because of her public reputation. A lot of people in Salem are angry with her, not only for the paternity issue, but also for having an affair on Roman. And her being ostracized is what eventually leads to probably Days' most famous storyline, which is Marlena becoming possessed by the devil, which was a total shock when people watched it. Again, it was brilliantly sort of put together the way they set this up. Again, it was set up months in advance or years in advance at this point, all leading to the fact that Marlena would be sort of alone with her thoughts. No one there. She would be in sort of a weakened state for the devil to eventually come in and sort of take hold for her, giving her probably, again, Days' most infamous storyline, the Marlena possession storyline. So yeah, that all was encompassed during Belle Black's eventual birth and sort of her paternity reveal. So yeah, that encapsulates all of Those Were the Days. I'm sure you guys remember those plots. If you do, please comment below. Let me know what you remember of them, what some of your favorite scenes from them, what insight you had watching them. And yes, I will see you next time as we do another segment of Those Were the Days Extended.
Those were